When you think about surviving in the ancient world, what comes to mind? Probably strength, right? Being a soldier, a gladiator. But what if I told you that for most people, survival wasn't about fighting the system at all? It was about knowing its hidden rules.
So what was the secret sauce? How did you actually make it through a world of plagues, wars, and emperors who could be, well, a little unpredictable? This question gets right to the heart of how these societies really worked, day in and day out.
And the answer is pretty simple, really. It was all about knowing the unwritten rules. See, the past was totally governed by these invisible social and spiritual codes. If you got them, you could navigate almost anything. But if you didn't, no amount of muscle could save you.
All right, so let's get into it. We're going to break down 4 of these really powerful unwritten rules. First up, surviving by being invisible. Then, why power was all about performance. After that, how to master a system just to break it. And finally, why the ancient world was anything but neutral.
Okay, rule number 1, survive by being invisible. And to understand this, we're heading to ancient Rome, a place where, believe it or not, the jobs we think of as heroic, they were often just a fast track to an early grave. The safest careers were the ones you've probably never even heard of.
Okay, just look at these 2 career paths. On one hand, you've got the Roman soldier. We romanticize it, right? But in reality, it was a life of brutal marches, constant danger, and let's be honest, a really high chance of not making it home. And on the other side, the armpit hair plucker. Yeah, I know, it sounds ridiculous, but think about it. This was a brilliant career move. You're working indoors, you're dealing with rich, powerful clients, and there's a 0% chance you're going to get trampled by a cavalry charge. In this world, being invisible was a superpower.
And this wasn't just a one-off. This same idea applied to a whole bunch of weirdly specific jobs. An orgy planner? They weren't just throwing parties. They were basically reputation managers for the elite, a super discreet, super important role. A urine tax collector? You had the authority of the state behind you, but you weren't the one getting your hands dirty. Even professional mourners and food tasters. They were all essential cogs in the social machine, but they did their work behind the scenes, far from the front lines.
So what's the big takeaway? The best survival strategy in Rome wasn't being brave. It was being connected to power and avoiding physical labor at all costs. It was about who you knew, not how strong you were. Basically, if your job let you sit down while you're working, you were already winning at life.
Okay, that brings us to our second rule, and you'll see how this builds on the first one. Power is a performance. We're talking about the high-stakes world of medieval courts now, and especially for women, what you did was way less important than how you looked doing it. Your survival literally depended on playing your part perfectly. Just take a look at the mourning ritual for a medieval queen. This was not a private moment of grief. No, it was a political show for the entire kingdom. First, you have the costume. Heavy black cloth designed to completely erase her personality and ambition. Then you have the stage, being locked away in sealed rooms, showing everyone she's withdrawn from power. And finally, the performance itself, a very public, very measured display of sorrow, all to prove she's loyal to the dead king and not a threat to the new one. Every single move was being watched and judged.
And this wasn't just a medieval thing. Think about Zenobia, the queen of Palmyra, back in the 3rd century. She was a master of this game. To the world, she played the part of a loyal regent for Rome, just a dutiful protector of her son's inheritance, upholding Roman authority. But behind that mask, she was using that performance as a shield, methodically building her own power base, getting ready to make her move.
So you see, it doesn't matter if you're a medieval queen locked in a mourning chamber or a desert empress plotting a revolution. The lesson is exactly the same. Public emotions weren't about what you actually felt. They were strategic tools. Grief could be a shield. Loyalty could be a disguise. In these worlds, mastering the performance was mastering power.
And this leads us perfectly into rule number 3. Master the system to break it. Zenobia's story is the absolute best example of this, because she didn't just perform loyalty. She started using Rome's own rules, its language, its symbols as weapons against it. And that, right there, is what made her one of the most dangerous threats the empire ever faced.
Her rise was just a masterclass in pushing the envelope. She starts in 267, playing the part, being the loyal regent. But then, in 270, she makes this incredibly bold move. She conquers Egypt and takes control of its grain supply, something Rome was supposed to do, but she does it for her empire. By 271, the mask is off. She claims the imperial title Augusta, which is a direct slap in the face to Rome. Her strategy was so smart, so Roman in its execution, that by the time the empire finally woke up and decided to respond, she'd already built a rival.
And that's the key. That's what made her so terrifying to them. Zenobia's rebellion was so potent because she wasn't just fighting Rome, she was becoming Rome. She was replicating their systems, their laws, their power structures. She proved that competence, not just brute force, could crack the empire from the inside. She wasn't some barbarian horde at the gates. She was a master of their own system who almost used it to tear the whole thing down.
All right, finally, we get to the most fundamental rule of all, the one that's kind of underneath everything else we've talked about. The world is not neutral. For ancient people, the universe wasn't just empty space. It was alive, and it was divided into these powerful, invisible zones. And crossing between them without permission, that was the most dangerous thing you could possibly do.
So in their minds, the world was split into two basic states. You had the profane, that's just everyday, ordinary life, and then you had the sacred. And sacred spaces, sacred times, sacred objects, they were humming with this dangerous, volatile power. If you tried to mix the two without being super careful, you were asking for disaster. And for them, this wasn't just some philosophical idea. It was as real as gravity.
So how did you manage this invisible boundary? You needed purity. And listen, this has nothing to do with being clean or taking a shower. This was about ritual acts. Washing, fasting, avoiding sex. These were all ways to change your spiritual state, to make yourself compatible, so you could safely approach a temple or an altar without, being zapped by its power. And taboos, those were basically the cosmic laws that enforced this separation. Certain foods, certain actions, even certain people were seen as blurring the lines, creating a kind of spiritual static or contamination. So breaking a taboo wasn't just a personal screw-up. It was an act that could throw the whole community into chaos.
And what happened when things did go wrong? When that balance was lost? Well, the ultimate reset button was sacrifice. We tend to think of it as just violence, but it was so much more. It was a controlled, transactional conversation with that sacred world. It was using life itself as the only currency powerful enough to get their attention and hopefully restore order to the universe.
So when you put it all together, whether you were trying to stay invisible in a crowded Roman city, performing your role perfectly at court, mastering an empire's rules to take it down, or just trying to navigate the boundary between worlds, survival in the past was a game. And the winners were the ones who understood these hidden codes of power, survival, and belief.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last, really big question. These ancient rules might seem strange and far away, but every society, including ours right now, runs on unwritten codes. So, take a second and think about it. What are the invisible rules of performance, of power, and of belief that are governing our lives today?